Has a dream ever inspired you to do something differently in the real world? Hello and welcome to Dream Space from Factory International with me, Gemma Cairney. I'm a broadcaster, an art lover, so many things, and one thing I'm dedicated to being is a daydreamer. We don't always give our daydreams enough credit, and in a world that often feels heavy, it's not always easy to give ourselves the space to imagine. But I find it so exciting thinking of all the possibilities that emerge if we just let our minds roam freely. Dreaming offers us respite and reprieve. It lets us conceive different ways of being and doing. And sometimes, in ways big or small, these visions become reality, shaping the way we live our lives and the fabric of the society that we live in. That's why, here on Dream Space, we invite some of the most exciting creative thinkers to take over our minds and our imagination to create their ultimate dream space, their ideal universe filled with all the weird and wonderful things that make them tick, unrestrained by the limits of everyday life. We want to push the boundaries of what is possible and reflect on the ways creativity can help us create a better world. Inventing tomorrow together. In the last episode, Hitain Patel shared his dream space, a warm place filled with the scent of coriander and ginger where people explore themselves through movement and touch connects people. This week, building her dream space against this blank canvas is Elizabeth Bernholz, better known as Gazelle Twin.
If there's just this room where we can be at one with either someone else's voice or our own voice, and we can just feel melody in our body and feel the way that it elongates time, I feel like that's something that's incredibly powerful.
An electronic music producer, composer and visual artist, she makes thought-provoking music which draws on her personal experiences and doesn't shy away from reflecting on the political state of things. Dystopian themes as well as the supernatural feature heavily in her work. And in her live performances, she has played with boldly shape-shifting into sometimes non-human-like personas. A standout example being an androgynous red and white jester figure, reminiscent of a Morris dancer and football hooligan at the same time, which was the stage costume for her 2018 album Pastoral. For Factory International, Elizabeth has been working alongside Maxine Peake, Sarah Frankham, Imogen Knight and Daisy Johnson on Robin Red Breast, a modern retelling which blends folk horror with immersive storytelling and live music. This is Gazelle Twin's Dream Space. Let's jump in. Who knows where we'll end up this time? Are you naturally a dreamer?
Oh yeah, for sure. The way that I work as a producer-musician is very much in a dream space. Dream amalgamated memories and things like that really, really drive a lot of the music and sound worlds that I create. And sometimes nightmares, in fact, very often nightmares. So when I'm making work, I spend so long getting myself immersed into headspaces, dream spaces, psychic spaces where I'm living and breathing a particular thought or memory or theme, which is quite a privilege because, you know, for most people that is something that's reserved to their downtime or their, you know, evenings or something like that. But this is my day-to-day thing, is getting really deeply into a particular world in order to then produce sounds and music that is imbued with that. So yes is the answer to that.
Are you still in a dream space, you know, when you're not working? Is it also imbued into your personal life?
Yes, I think so. I'm a parent of 2 young boys and, you know, when I'm not working, I'm usually playing with them, and so much of their experience of the world so far is through play. That is the counter version of my kind of work headspace. just play space with them and going into those wonderful worlds of their imagination and kind of getting lost in those too.
So here we are, no particular brief. It doesn't matter which world you're in, the professional, the personal, it's completely open. Where do you see or feel this dream space taking us from the offset?
For me, the idea of a dream space is somewhere that is a safe space, and it's somewhere that has boundless resources for creativity and expression. The way that I produce my own work is usually through processing quite negative experiences, feelings of anxiety or depression, going through puberty, growing up into an adulthood, becoming a parent, loads of which I struggled with, and finding a route through that by identifying and almost recreating those feelings and those atmospheres that those experiences can create. And then the process of recreating it, giving it a face, a world to exist in, a sound, you start to understand it more, but you also get to kind of externalize it. And then at some point, it kind of takes on another life. It's weirdly similar to how some forms of therapy work, in where you might have a sort of looping memory that's difficult. And the idea is that you have to slow that loop down. You go through that loop over and over and over again. You start to identify the detail in it to the point where that loop stops and you can finally put it to rest, or maybe not even put it completely to rest, but you can finally just look at it and it no longer has the physical power over you that it did before. This was the dream. Tell you this dream. Tell you this dream. I had. Tell you this dream. I had. And so how I approach my own music is very similar. It's about finding those difficult feelings, those difficult moments, and isolating them. And that's only possible when you're in a place of freedom and you have the support and the safety of your environment to be able to go through that in, just as you would in a therapist's room. My childhood was so open and creative. I got to just be completely at one with my desires and my urges. And so whilst my output is often very much articulating these internal anxieties and things, that's only possible because I have this history of nurture in my creative process. And so when I was thinking about this dream space, I was thinking that I imagine my dream space to be a family space too. And not just my family, but maybe a group of families who have this desire to be in a place where they're unified by the chance to create stuff. And I feel so lucky that I grew up in a time where it was still valued in the curriculum, music, art, drama, poetry. And now it seems as though these things have been very deliberately kind of ripped away. I'm not specifically trying to point out the current government's education programme, but I also am. And so my dream space is this nurturing half school, half commune home where people can just live out these urges at any age in order to just make themselves feel better, basically, and get through the many, many obstacles that life throws our way.
I'm definitely leaning into this idea of collective autonomy and communal sharing. And I think it's really interesting that you're not afraid to go there in terms of it's not just a pleasant utopia. It's actually a space where we get to process, so we can face our fears and almost therapize ourselves and heal. How does somebody set that up safely?
Good question. Initially, I envisaged just this really big house that has these vast, welcoming, beautiful rooms that have these resources to be used by anyone at any time to make music, to paint, to make sculptures, to make films, animations. If you have that spark of inspiration, you've got the means to kind of see it through and do it. In terms of managing everybody's needs, what you'd have is a group of people with those skills and that experience and knowledge, and you'd be sharing these moments together and supporting each other. And it's something that, you don't get very easily these days. There's multiple processes to go through just to, for example, have therapy or to get seen by a GP, or, there's so many things that make it almost impossible to help yourself. And I think part of that dream space would be that those barriers are gone, that help is there and that support is there instantly. And it may not be family, it might be friends, it might be professionals, or a whole group of people that have those skills, but there's no barrier to making the most of those skills and communicating with those people. But I'm always interested in that idea of it takes a village to raise children, is the kind of well-known phrase. But for me, it's like it takes a village just to kind of get through everything, really, all the stages of life.
I love this idea of a house full of resources. How does time work in your dream space? Because time seems so limited, and in a limitlessness of support, is there such a thing as time, and how long do you see the dream space existing for?
Oh, I see it as this permanent cyclical thing, really. It houses generations of people. Now I picture it, I kind of imagine this permanent summer evening, those summer evenings where time does feel like it's completely frozen. I just love the idea that you could just be in this permanent kind of summer dusk situation where there's no limit to the time that you have to put into something, and to just sit and dream and think and rest and take your time with stuff. Chances to take time are very, very rare now, and the pressure to be doing something even when we're not working. I'm thinking of like my childhood holidays in southern Spain, I think they were. I just remember that being like a completely different world to the one I was used to at home in England, and just thinking, wow, the kids here get to stay up till 10 p.m. They go to the beach every day or every week, and it's only cold for a few months of the year, and they get to spend all their time outside, and there's these amazing insects that make this incredible buzzing sound at night. I just remember being really taken with that. And the pine trees too. My whole life I've been obsessed with the smell of pine trees in the sun and in the summer, and especially the evening when everything's kind of landing to the ground and there's that beautiful, deep, rich smell. I think wherever this dream space is, there's pine trees everywhere, and you just get to go and just soak up that amazing smell that they create. I actually named my son after pine trees. That I found a name that means pine tree.
Beautiful.
That's how much I love them.
So evocative, that smell.
I could just sit and enjoy this atmosphere. When do we get to sit and enjoy atmospheres?
I try, but I make it quite militant. It's like a militant exercise to get to the bliss.
Right.
You have to say, I'm not going to be contactable, or I will travel to this space. It really requires quite a draining process to get to that.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's warm, we have insects buzzing, we're going to inhabit this Mediterranean feel, the light, the freedom of not necessarily having to go to bed early.
Yes.
I love it.
Yes.
Do you think that you would infuse any of your past projects? I mean, is there anything on display, an archive or a particular sound that we experience in one of the rooms that's already been created?
Ooh. Well, I'm working on a few projects at the moment, and one of them, it's a score that I'm working on, and one of the reference points for the score was some work by Meredith Monk. I've been kind of immersing myself in it even more lately and really enjoying, and as an electronic producer, there's a lot of stuff going on in my music, there's a lot of layers and noise, but what I've been really loving riffing on lately is just the simplicity of the voice on its own, finding its way through a melody. It's just something that's so beautiful and has such a meditative quality. In the dream space, if there's just this room where we can be at one with either someone else's voice or our own voice, and we can just feel melody in our body and feel the way that it elongates time. I feel like that's something that's incredibly powerful. I think also as a communal thing, it's also obviously really powerful. People's voices collectively, they definitely do something to our physiology. They do something to us emotionally. And for that to be part of some kind of process where we get to experience our bodies, time or space differently, more intuitively, then yeah, I would love to do something like that. I'd love to have that as part of it.
Perhaps it's warm enough for us to be on the lawn even, or outside somehow.
Yes.
Really using the potential of our voices as guided by you. I can't sing for toffee.
All voices count. It's not about singing in tune either. Sometimes it's just about joining into one sound. I think it's your conduit into your guts, into your intimate body. And I think there's something about that. Like, it's not about music necessarily. It's not about tuning. It's just that sound that's being produced from your body and joining together with other voices in a space. That's magic.
It really can shift a vibe or a connection to the people around you. Like our body is the vessel, and in a time where it can feel quite helpless to even offer that sense of support that you want throughout this dream space, just connecting through voice is a really powerful tool that we all have available to us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you think of other artists that you would like to have there?
Well, I mentioned Meredith Monk. Be great to have her there. There's a particular visual artist, Patricia Piccanini. I've always been captivated by her work because it's like hyper-real sculptures of these half animal, half human hybrid species. And not only does she create these incredible hyper-real sculptures, they look like they're breathing, and they've got hair and they've got blemishes on their skin. They're just something really, really childlike and strange about them that I love. But also she photographs them in these spaces which are very dreamlike. And there's just these stories and these fantasy narrative that is created through these creatures that is so confusing but fascinating. I would love to be around her to just see how she actually makes them. It's just fascinating to me how one of those things you don't get to see. You don't get that insight all the time into an artist's process. So I think in the dream space, in a way, you'd have like an artist studios that people are working in, but they're completely open, and you get to see how people go through their processes and what they discard or what they choose to keep. When I was at school, it was kind of a choice for me to do music or to do art. And if I was going to do art, then I kind of had this leaning towards sculpture. And it's this pathway that I never got to realise, or maybe not yet, or film. I'm also really visually led with the work that I make. So film, animation, art are kind of like mostly the food that I feed myself when I'm creating work. I very rarely input music into my mind. If I'm going to write music, I kind of need the visual input more than the kind of auditory stuff. I'm a really big fan of Mark Jenkins, who's a Cornish filmmaker. I feel like he's not a million miles away from the kinds of processes that I go through, which is looking at identity and assessing how the past, how historical events and how historical cultural events remain present but are being altered by our contemporary culture and contemporary society. He uses old technology as well to tell his visual stories, which I think is really magical. I think to have somebody like that in the dream space and see their processes and all the beautiful kind of really handmade processes as well would be just so inspiring.
Imagine if everybody made stuff together as well. And not that there would be that pressure. It doesn't have to be like the commission, but being able to have space that's really open and evolving and permanent and there, and where time doesn't really matter, money doesn't matter, in terms of budgets. It would be so fascinating to see how people ended up collaborating.
Yeah, it would be really, really total dream, wouldn't it, to be able to just work with those people and just start from scratch without any agenda, without any goal.
I often wonder why we can't quite do it in modern times. I mean, who can actually commit to starting the Dream Artists Commune?
I don't know. A billionaire, probably. The obstacle is always just money, really, and time. And it's interesting to think of that on a bigger scale. Like, what if we did do a 4-day working week? What if we did make childcare more accessible and both parents were given a year or 2 years funded time with their children to just not work, not to be under pressure all the time? I feel like it always comes down to money, and it shouldn't, and it's depressing, but it kind of is like that. You know, the reason I'm sitting here talking to you is because my kids are in childcare. I'm privileged even in that, where I can do that, and it feels like this huge resource that costs such a lot of money, and just living a basic life, I think, for most people now feels kind of unimaginably difficult. So the idea of these spaces, it only ever serves to prove that we need more of them. But it's just how you convince a government or councils or whatever, you know, to invest in these things.
I gather your soul. Eat your debts, debts, debts. Open, close, debt, relief. Insolvency, insolvency, insolvency.
Visually, a lot of your performances and videos have very specific key looks and mask work, etc. Do we have some stuff to play with? Is there a fancy dress box in your dream space?
Oh yeah, there's a whole room dedicated to costume. I'd like a Cindy Sherman style archive of every single costume you could possibly imagine. That would be like the first port of call for me, actually, would be like a massive dressing up room. Because what I've found, and the reason that I use these devices in my visual presentation is, well, partly for fun, partly just to kind of step aside from myself, maybe like redirect the focus a little bit on something else. I'm also really into the uncanny. I think costumes, there's just so many things that they do to us. Wearing costumes, but also seeing people in costumes, there's lots of stuff going on viscerally. And there's a freedom in it too. And I think when we're kids, we get to experience this in its purest form, when we get to dress up, maybe at Halloween, as something scary, and we get to feel the power of what it's like to sort of be out of ourselves, but in something else where we kind of have this different sense of ourselves. Reflecting back, I got addicted to that, I think. And maybe that's because I grew up with not quite feeling 100% belonging to the world. And obviously I've found my path as an artist, and that's been my role, and I've somehow found a way to fit. But I think costume for me was this kind of portal into another way of feeling and being, and just the chance to play in another identity did so much for me as a kid, and still does. You know, and I talked about Cindy Sherman, who, you know, one of my favourite artists of all time. The way that she uses costume and masks and makeup as her art form to say so much is just such a marvel. I just think it's so fascinating.
I love it. I love it. We can smell pine, we can feel warmth. Dusk is all around us. We are invited to use our voices if we want. There are studios, a buzz where people can support us, whether it's something, you know, that really requires depth therapeutically or super playful. We can go into a room and get lost in a world of dress up. Where do we nourish ourselves so that we can do it all again tomorrow?
In this world, you know, food should be the real grounding place. It should be hitting every single note that we need food to hit. I enjoy cooking for my children and getting them to try new things and seeing their excitement about food. That is one of my biggest pleasures, is to just share food with my children. I grew up in a, I guess, middle-class white family in the 80s, and we lived rurally. But my parents somehow just had this knowledge of non-English cuisines that they just were obsessed with. And so I grew up eating like curries and amazing sort of homemade Chinese food. I kind of grew up with this really special experience of foods that I just took for granted until I got older and just realised that most friends didn't eat that kind of stuff at home. But this was like our staple food. So somewhere where there's these kind of big pots cooking, you know, amazing curries and stews and things like that all day long, really nurturing, nourishing food. Just the smell of that is home to me. So big kitchen, massive table, everyone can eat whenever they need, communally, it's just all shared. It's just, that would be so beautiful. I'm really hungry now.
I'm moving in, I'm coming, I am totally sold. It's all been really, really lovely, really beautiful and halcyon. And actually quite different to what I might have expected. There's something really soft about it. Like Gazelle Twin, obviously, there's so much to Gazelle Twin. But there's just all these tropes, isn't there, of like electronic music and being able to dive into a horrorscape as well as getting people on a dance floor to lose themselves. You know, there's an interesting understanding of your world on the outset. So yeah, all I can say is a big thank you for letting us into a dream space, and let's try and make it actually happen.
When do you get to do that, really? Like, to actually just properly dream? Because it's just, if you don't do that, then this stuff won't happen, will it? That kind of whole thing of like... Manifesting, yeah. Unless you think of it, you know, you can't manifest it, can you?
I'm Gemma Cairney, and you've been listening to Dream Space from Factory International. Today you heard all about Gazelle Twin's Dream Space, a place full of community where people are free to express themselves and art forms combine. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to like and subscribe to the podcast. Your support always means a lot to us, so spread the word. And if you can't wait until the next episode, then you can head to Factory International's website to find more exciting artistic content on Factory Plus. And if this is your first taste of the Dream Space universe, thank you for joining us. Do check out previous episodes in the series with Hatain Patel and DJ Paulette. There's also Series 1 with guests including Maxine Peake, Nabia Iqbal and Scotty. There are some absolute delights in those conversations. Dream Space was hosted by me, Gemma Cairney, and this episode was produced by Nada Smiljanich with sound design by Femi Oriogun-Williams and theme music by Andrew P.M. Hunt. The executive producer is Kit Callan, and this is a reduced listening production for Factory International, curated by Scott Smith and Alex Mannion-Jones. Until next time.